every experience I have makes me better at what I do today because I learn something that I don't know. Going from, a for-profit business into a community, service business,
Yeah.
taught me that you can be incredibly successful and do good at the same time.
What do you think people have seen in you to give you that responsibility?
I think it's a willingness to take something on.
Yep.
Going into a CIO role with zippity doodah technical capability,
Yeah.
my imposter complex syndrome was like high. You're not an expert until you learn, so go and learn first.
Rebeiro, a distinguished tech leader listed in the prestigious CIO 50 for 3 consecutive years. Jem was also recognised among the top 50 women in the public sector in 2021. A transformation-focused and strategic technology leader, Jem brings over 20 years of experience managing operations and projects spanning across various industries such as banking, finance, transport, manufacturing, property services, telecommunications and government. She has also held roles at organisations including ANZ, Ansett, MVS Global, Victoria Police Force, Parks Victoria, Greater Western Water, and most recently, TAC. Jen, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to hearing your story and just sort of learning about the journey that you've followed through your career. But let's turn back the clock. I saw that you graduated from Victoria University 1996 with a degree in HR and psychology. So my first kind of point of interest was what motivated you to follow that path?
Oh, that's a very easy one. I was told to get a job in a bank by my father.
Yep.
So he said, he really set the criteria for the 4 children, which is my sister was to be a nurse, my brother was to be in a trade mechanic type thing. I think he did fitter and turning. My other brother was to work in an airline.
Yeah.
And I was to work in a bank.
Is he trying to create like the next version of the Village People? What was the ambition?
He was probably thinking about his retirement. So he needed somebody, his life. He needed somebody in the medical field to be able to, deal with the health.
Yep.
He needed somebody to be able to deal with the household things. He wanted to travel, so he got someone to take him somewhere. Yeah. And I was to make sure that the finances were okay.
Yeah, there you go.
From the banking perspective, but I did HR.
You did HR instead.
Yeah.
So what about that kind of course then pulled you in?
So I think it was, when you're a young kid looking at courses at uni, and you sort of go, what am I going to do? And I went to an all-girls Catholic school, and so therefore I think the ambition wasn't as great as probably the ambition is today. And so there were it was very much gendered-based roles.
Interesting.
HR is a very gendered-based role. So therefore no one pushed me into a finance role. They said, you're a people person. Yeah. Why don't you think about HR?
That's really interesting. I've never thought about that before, but you're right. I guess, and I don't know how many schools these days are kind of separate by gender, but you're right. There's potentially a bias very early on there.
A while ago.
It was a while ago,
yeah.
But I wonder how much that kind of continues today. But so you looking at your resume, around that time you also did go into banking because you joined ANZ, but it looked like you did that while you were studying.
I did.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So were you studying part-time, working part-time? How did you kind of balance those things?
Yeah, I was working part-time, so I started working, and I think I mentioned to you just before that I was in music retail for a long time. So that was my first part-time role. And then when I got to uni, I thought to myself, how am I going to get a job as a graduate? And so that means I'd have to go through this graduate program, and thought, well, how can I manage my chance of getting a job? Why don't I apply for a job in a bank as a teller? And that's how I started. Yeah. And so did part-time work 13 hours a week as a teller, and then weekends at the shop, and then studied in the middle.
So you're still working in music retail at that point? Okay, wow. So there's a lot going on there. There's 2 jobs, university, and lots of customer interaction.
Lots of customer interaction. So if I have to go, where did I get my people interaction, my customer piece? It's absolutely in the shop.
Yeah, because it's interesting that I forget who it was, but we had a guest a couple of weeks back and had also exactly the same path, worked in a bank and then ended up going into tech in that bank, and they supported them through university. And we talked about that in terms of a customer coming into a bank, and often at a very low moment. They're coming in, they're financially in difficulty, and you're there, relatively young and inexperienced, and you've got to deal with that person face to face, and how that kind of shapes you. I'm just wondering, do you remember those experiences in terms of
less so in the bank, less so in banking, in the retail banking side, so in the teller or customer service side.
Yeah.
Absolutely in the music retail side.
Yeah. Okay.
Dealing with people there was fascinating. Dealing with employees there was fascinating because people, I learned that people want interaction, and so we would have repeat customers in the music retail store, and they would come to you and say, "Oh, what's new and what's hot?" And I can't remember what's hot new, and I'd look through the CDs at the time and go, "Oh, this looks like a good cover," sort of pull it out and say, "Well, can I play this for you?" And they'd go away with stack high. But part of their process was spending half an hour in a store building conversation and engaging with you. So I think I learnt a lot more from that environment, because you had very different walks and talks coming in and having a look. The obsessive, Prince Queen fan going, "I want everything you've got," versus somebody just wanting to buy the single in those days. So that was quite different. Whereas I was in banking in the city, so I was in a branch on Queen Street, predominantly lawyers, money, trusts. So it was a very, very simple. They'd come in, hand over their books, and then go back out again. Write checks. That's the sort of thing. So it's very different. Or safety deposit boxes. And
you kind of followed your ambition there, because after university you moved into a corporate role, I believe, with Ansett, and ended up in capacity planning.
Yeah.
What did that role entail? What did that look like?
Well, and it follows the HR path in many ways. So I wanted to go into HR, and the first corporate role I got was scheduling officer, so staff scheduling officer. So so for the Melbourne branches, working up what their staffing rosters look like.
Yeah, okay.
So that was my first role. Yeah. And then I was in that role for about 3 months, and ANZ Global started. And so I went on to their transformation program.
Yep.
And my role was to move from sort of a really old type rostering system to a dynamic rostering system that could be done centralised for the whole of the country.
Yeah, right.
And so it was still following that HR, like it was that HR pathway, but in a very sort of streamlined workforce planning pathway. And capacity planning was determining what the capacity requirements were for the country, and modelling that out.
Got it. So that's interesting. So you became almost like, let's say, the subject matter expert within the rostering side, and then with the transformation you just kind of followed that through in terms of the modernisation, let's say, of the process. Because I saw after ANZ you moved on to Ansett, which I believe is the airline, or was the airline. And I saw there you joined as a BA.
Yep.
And I thought that was interesting, because you've kind of come up through the HR path, and then you've kind of gone into this BA role. But I guess what your experience there with ANZ would explain that transition. You started to move in that direction, away from HR towards the project side.
Yeah, almost immediately. So if I think going into the transformation role, so ANZ Global gave me a taste of sort of pace, working at pace and working with really specific outcomes.
Yeah.
And then, I did the capacity planning role for a while. And then this role came up at Ansett, which was their business transformation program, and it was an analyst role. And, I thought, that would be good.
Yeah.
Let me try something like that. Again, in that transformation sort of BA change space. That role was really about process re-engineering, so looking at a business problem and going, how would you do it differently? Not so much tech at all.
Yeah, okay.
Again, the people side of it. So how do you re-engineer to save FTE to take cost out of the business? So taking that cost out lens as well. And so I was there for pretty much from 2000 to collapse, so which was 2001.
Yeah.
So just I think 3 weeks shy of 2 years.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a couple of things there I've got some thoughts around. Based on experience, what do you think makes a good BA?
Well, I still hold the view that there are two types of BA. So there's a business BA and a technical BA.
Okay.
And a business BA is curiosity and being able to join the dots between what someone's saying, what someone does, and what could happen. A technical BA is very much around requirements gathering, understanding process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I still, being able to translate into a technical solution, very different. I say they're different roles.
I think what's interesting there is, in both situations, they're ultimately kind of underlying the understanding the underlying problem, but with a degree of an understanding of the potential solution.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't. I think if a BA is doing their job properly, they're constantly thinking about what they're looking for.
Yes.
If they're just doing their job to produce a mediocre, I'm completing a report, you're not a BA.
Yeah, that's right. So it's more than requirements gathering; it's understanding, deeply
absolutely.
understanding. Yeah, that's right. Okay. You also mentioned there, as we know, Ansett obviously went into administration, and I think what stood out for me is you were still sort of relatively young into your career at that point, and going through a situation where a business is collapsing, going into administration. That's that's a big emotional experience to go through very early in your career. What did you kind of experience through that time?
You're 100% correct. It was an incredibly confronting experience, and not for the reason that you might think that an organisation's gone into collapse.
Yeah.
It was confronting because I was an employee that continued to work beyond collapse, because I was in HR at the time. I was in proper HR at the time, so like working for regional airlines, looking at awards and things like that. And I continued to work because I was in HR to be able to, answer queries and phone calls and things like that. But I also worked on the award and the costing for Ansett Mark II.
Yeah.
So the startup, Tesna. And so I was working all the way through. And so that with that came a lot of guilt because some of the phone calls that we're getting is I can't put food on the table.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I'm sitting there going, I'm still getting an income nicely. I'm going to get a redundancy payment, beautiful, but I'd only been in the organisation for 2 years.
Yeah.
And so that comes with a lot of guilt. And I remember saying to my mum at one point, I think I need to go. My mum worked in a mental health clinic, just to be clear. I think I need to go and see one of the psychologists to deal with this. And then having that conversation meant that I dealt with it, so I moved on.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
but it was something that was, really thinking about this is actually impacting me here.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think that kind of survivor guilt.
Yeah.
Is really common in a redundancy situation. And look, this week we've just had Telstra announce 2,800 redundancies, and there's the psychological impact for those people that are now probably worried about their jobs and their incomes and so forth. But there is also an impact on the people left behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. I noticed after that you kind of briefly moved to GE Capital, where you spent about a year or so.
A year.
Project.
Yeah.
It wasn't a very long stint. I kind of wondered what was going on.
So it was a role that I picked up after Ansett. Obviously, that wasn't going to be a long-term role.
Yeah.
Once it collapsed, and it was a project role. Probably my first real foray into leading a project, being the project manager.
Okay.
There, it was an HR project.
Right.
But it was an HR project that actually led me again more into sort of systems thinking, because it was an HR project that had call center rostering optimization involved in it. So I had enjoyed my time at GE, but GE is a very structured organisation, and there's a particular GE way of working.
Yeah.
And I don't tend to conform that way.
Yeah.
So, at GE, I shouldn't, this is my experience. So, very different if people have different experiences. But I felt that I had to conform, and I couldn't be myself and have my own independent views and take independent pathways. And while I was at GE, I was asked to join a consulting organisation.
Yeah,
so that's why I moved on.
But you know what? I think that's again, it's really insightful to hear that experience that you had, because every culture is slightly different. And just because it's a big, large corporate that's successful doesn't mean it's the right culture for you. And I think being having the courage or the bravery at that point or any point in your career to kind of join somewhere and kind of go, okay, well, I'm on a project, I'll see the project through, but maybe this isn't really where I need to be long term, and move on. I think that's the kind of courage we should encourage in people.
Yeah, and do it quickly would be what I would say, is that when it's not right.
Yeah.
And I've lived a charmed life. I've had fabulous experiences in every role I've had, including GE. But when you know it's not right, it's not right.
Yeah. I think sometimes you need to know what's not right to know what is right. I'm trying to get those words out, but you understand what I mean. As in, you got to see what's not right for you to understand or appreciate really what you do want as well.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the journey. And I saw you mentioned there about Praxis. I saw that you joined Praxis, and I'll be honest, I was looking at kind of your resume and your LinkedIn, and this part of your life or career, I was sort of scratching my head a bit, because there was kind of Praxis part-time. It said 2003, 2006, and then MBS Global part-time. And I was thinking, okay, I'm just going to have to ask the question because I can't quite suss this one out. So what was going on?
So Praxis was a boutique HR consulting firm and a New Zealand firm, and it was run by an amazing woman, like probably one of the most influential women in my life. And
who's that?
Carol Abernethy is her name.
Yeah.
And she, alongside another person who was an industrial lawyer, so Carol had a really good payroll background. Tanya had a really good legal background, IR background, and I had really good workforce planning, so that rostering sort of process re-engineering background. And so we worked together on sort of large-scale projects, etc. And so as part of that, you build your own client base as well. And so I started doing some work for different people. Carol, she had young children at the time, so decided to, probably just head back and stay in New Zealand. And it was really hard to sort of work through some of that. So I ended up getting another role. But because I still had people I was doing work for, I did them both at the same time.
That makes sense.
But just maybe in the evening. And I even did that for Carol when she was back in New Zealand. And she'd say, can you help me out with this particular client? And I did. So sort of go, I'll do that at night time, etc.
Yeah, got it. So that's interesting, because I think MBS, who you're working for, was like an RPO product.
Yes.
By the look of it. So that was, because I'm not familiar with them.
They're no longer in existence.
Yeah, I think that's probably why. Because I thought, God, I should know an RPO product. Been doing it long enough. But so that does make sense. You were kind of doing it alongside. And that's, I guess, what's interesting through that period of your life then. Kind of what did you learn about yourself and maybe your ambitions for your own career?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and which I've been asked many times. And I would say that I don't think I've ever really had a focused, ambitious pathway. Like, I want to go here and I want to go there and I want to go there. It's like, that sounds really interesting. What does that look like? Yeah, maybe I'll try that. And it's that's how I've progressed. Yeah. And probably still progress in many ways. Yeah. Probably a little bit more structured now in my thinking. Yeah. But it's really an opportunity has arisen. It looks really interesting. I think I can add value, and so I go there and do that. Yeah. So I've never really I want to be a manager, and then I want to be a general manager, and then I want to be a CEO. I've never actually taken that thinking. It's like, I'll just see where the world takes me.
If it reassures you, you're guest number 20 on the show, and I don't think anyone's come in yet and said there was a master plan. But I think what I'm interested in there is, as well as, were there any experiences during that time where you kind of thought, okay, this has kind of pricked my curiosity, or there's a bit here that I want to learn a bit more about, or that I really enjoyed?
Okay, so what Praxis taught me is that consulting is lonely, and that I like to belong. Okay. So it taught me that being in long-term consulting was never going to really be my pathway. And so that, belonging to an organisation is where I should be. And so that sort of said I should always be employed by somebody and working in a bigger organisation. And Praxis at MVS was 25, 30 people max. So that taught me that. MVS taught me that you can change your direction and your by learning, and your opportunity by learning. So my role at MVS to begin with was recruitment, process outsourcing, and so therefore going into a business going, how can we optimize your service by providing an outsourced product and technology with it. And as a consultant, you're not at it's peaks and troughs. And so therefore there were times where I just wasn't busy, and so I'd go and sit with the developers and work through the projects, the product development, and say, can you explain to me this, and how does this work, and how do you build the software? So just to keep myself entertained, I started to get involved in the product development side.
Yeah, great. God, there's a lot there, isn't there? So you've kind of figured out what environment you like around work, and you've expanded your knowledge through that kind of curiosity, which probably takes you back to the kind of BA you were as well.
Probably, yeah.
It's kind of inherent in you to kind of go and unpack things and learn about them. I saw, so not long after that, you kind of moved on. I saw Go Frog on your resume, and I thought, I don't know what that is, but that sounds great.
Yeah.
That was a relatively short contract, I think, as well.
It was actually, would I call it a contract? I wouldn't call it a contract. It was a startup, and that was started up by one of the owners of MVS.
Got it. Yeah.
And so when MVS was sold, the owner said, "Do you want to come and play in some of this space?"
Yeah, right.
And I said, "Okay, yeah, I could do that." And it was 3D web. So I don't know if you recall a game or an environment called Second Life.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Second Life was a plug-in, download, and then you'd engage with your avatars, etc.
Yeah, that's right.
And Go Frog was lifting it up into sort of web-based platform so that you didn't have to download, and so you could jump into it relatively quickly. And so that was great. So learning how to build out a product and how to monetize something, how we were going to be mega millionaires, not. And but during, I remember there was a process where we went to get capital, and the market just, it was global financial crisis, and the money just dried up.
Yeah, okay.
So therefore my time's dried
2008, around that kind of time?
2008, 2009.
Yeah, that was tough times. And I saw, so around that time you then joined Vic Police, which was when my impression from looking at your resume was an incredible time. You kind of started as a senior project manager, went all the way through as to deputy CIO in that time. And my kind of read, looking in from the outside, was that everything you'd kind of done in your career before just kind of came together at this point into these roles and solidified in terms of your starting to become more look like a career. I think everything before was the learning experiences in the nicest possible way, and I mean that as a compliment. So what was going on? What was kind of happening? Tell me a bit more about Vic Police.
So I might take you a step back and say, I'll tell you what happened at MVS. At MVS, I had 2 kids. And so by the time I moved to VicPol, I had a 2-year-old. My youngest was 2. And I was traveling quite a lot in the intervening period. And this is actually really hard to do so, to travel and have a 2-year-old. So let me look for a Victorian-based organisation, so I'm not travelling as much. And that's how I landed at VicPol. And I looked for a job, saw a project manager job, doing rostering. Okay, well, I'm pretty skilled at this now, and got the job, and then my world changed dramatically because I ended up working probably twice as much as I did at MVS, because we had a really big HR implementation that I ended up leading.
Yeah, great. And through that time, you kind of moved into more people leadership as well, in terms of that
No,
Would you
at
say so?
MVS I was ultimately at the end at MVS I was probably leading the software business side. So had people leadership. Actually, I've had people leadership all the way through.
Yeah. Okay.
So wherever I've ended up somehow leading.
Yeah.
If not, except for my periods as a BA.
Yep.
I've ended up leading people all the way through.
So that's interesting. So
even at the shop.
So what? Because there's a trend there, right? There's a trend that people have always put trust in you and given you responsibility wherever you've gone. Then, so what do you think people have seen in you to give you that responsibility?
I don't know. I've never really thought about that. That's not a.
You're a very humble person, right?
Yeah.
So it's very hard to sit there and just pat yourself on the back and talk about how great you are. But there must be. I mean, put yourself on the other side of the shoes. What do you look for in other people to give them that kind of responsibility?
So I think it's a willingness to take something on.
Yeah.
So in the shop, like now I'm really going back.
Yeah.
It was really about, we had part-time people. Someone had to manage, again, probably the roster, and do the pays and things like that. And so therefore I ended up going, I can do that work. It's process. I can take it on. And so therefore that's what I did. And then we opened another store and I said, well, I'll go and, run that store. So just, it's a little bit of putting my hand up and saying, I'll go and do it. And a little bit of, I'll just do it.
Yeah.
And I still probably just go, I'll just do it.
Yeah. So you're more ask permission. Sorry, not ask for permission, ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, a little bit. Or it needs to be done, I could watch somebody else try to figure out how to do it, or just step in and go, I think I know how to do it. And
okay. So you're quite a catalyst, would you say, for getting things done?
Yeah. If it needs to be done, it needs to be done. You can't walk away from that.
Yeah. Look, and I think that's, again, it's probably something you take for granted in yourself, but it's a trait that no doubt has made you or enabled you to be as successful as you've been, because I think people do look for that in a business or an organisation, in your team. You're looking for people that want to own problems and make things happen, and I think that does help people to probably. I can't think how you described your career, very fortunate or something. The way you described very blessed, but that comes probably because of the person that you brought to the table.
Probably. I would say that I'm quite a positive person, and I don't mind working hard. So therefore, I'll work hard. But along the way, I've built some really great friendships.
Yeah.
And maintain these friendships. And if I go right back to my first role, apart from the fact that my manager is now also my husband, but we won't go there. But also one of the girls that I met working in the shop, is still a very good friend of mine. Yeah. And that's a long time ago.
Well, and again, I think it's probably because you brought people with you on your journey. I think that there's maybe a misconception that to be successful, you have to be ruthless.
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
And I don't think that's the case.
And I think moving from private to public also taught me that.
Yeah.
So going from, a for-profit business into a community, service business, taught me that you can be incredibly successful and do good at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think once you find the blend of the two, it's really powerful, and it's very energizing, I think, to be part of something like that. You were with Vic Police for 5 years, give or take.
Yeah, over, yeah.
How did you know it was time to move on?
The environment probably changed around me, and there were things that weren't necessarily working as well as they could, and so therefore it was time for me to move on.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. So you kind of made an assessment, you're done here, kind of what's good is not so good, and it's time to go on.
Exactly. And I loved my time at VicPol and did some great things, and really, things I'm really, really proud of. and then I moved into a CIO role, so that's really great as well. And moving from deputy CIO in an organisation that is really big, like VicPol, into the CIO role at Parks, again, gave me such great opportunity.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you what kind of pulled you into the role there at Parks.
Well, it was that opportunity to go. Well, I knew that it was time for me to move on.
Yeah.
You can only be so successful and influence so much sometimes. Moving to Parks was an opportunity, again, was presented in this instance.
Yeah.
And so was successful in achieving the CIO role, which in the end, I think I only did for about 7 months.
Yeah.
Before stepping into the
you moved then on
role.
You moved on again into that exec role. That's right.
Yeah.
So I was interested when you moved to Parks. Was there anything specific you did to prepare yourself for that role?
Not at Parks, no. So that was an exiting out and entering in, and just trying at that point to understand. Actually, I know government. So what I took into Parks was that I had now gained a good understanding of what government processes are and things like that. But what I needed to do is understand a Parks agency. And born and bred in Melbourne, CB, like inner Melbourne, me going to a national park was not quite a thing that I did.
Yeah.
I'm terrified of spiders. So going out in nature was never a thing that I really wanted to do. Ride a bike and do all of that stuff. But, hiking in a park was not ever part of my upbringing or was never intended to be part of my life going forward. So I think for me it was just trying to understand, what does that look like?
Yeah. So I've got this stupid image in my head now of you in the interview, and they said, "What's your biggest weakness?" Fear of spiders.
Believe me, there were times when that was on show aplenty.
Yeah, right. Did you have an idea of the kind of CIO you wanted to be when you moved into that role? Had you kind of formed an image through your previous experiences of what that person needed to be?
I think what I knew about myself at the time, and what I still know about myself, is that I'm not a run person. So I'm not a run CIO. So I'm not a CIO that says everything's working really well, just make sure that the lights are on.
Yeah.
Do your legacy management, and just make sure the business works as efficiently as it can. Yeah. That is not where I come from. I'm probably a build, what can we be, what should we be, how can we be type of person. And so therefore going into that role, and any role that I go into, it's really, I know what I can do. That's why people are hiring me. But what I don't know is the organisation I'm going into.
Yeah.
So for me, it was really about learning the organisation I'm going into and understanding what value I could bring. How do I bring the skills and capabilities that I have, which is knowing how to deliver projects at scale, knowing how to think from a technical perspective, and again, going into a CIO role with zippity-doo-dah technical capability. My imposter complex syndrome was like high. But at least I knew how to manage people, and I knew how to understand the basics of good technology and how it all hangs together, even though I didn't have the qual.
Yes, interesting, because that also maybe makes sense, because I was reading after that. Obviously you moved on a couple of roles on, you then moved to City West Water as CIO, or Greater Western Water as it is today. And I was reading on your resume there that when you joined, there was the vision to become a digital utility agency. And I was just interested, what is that? What drew you to the role? Because there was so much transformation to happen in terms of what they wanted to become.
And I'm going to step back a little bit
again.
Yes, right.
It's gone. I'm going to go to club
assist. The role
assist.
that was just before I went to City West Water was an HR role.
Yeah.
And so EGM of HR. And what I discovered in that role is that good people management, so good, people engagement, culture, takes time and takes a lot of effort where you don't see reward, and and I think I discovered that I'm probably an instantaneous gratification type person, and so I want to be able to see the fruits of my labour at a lot faster pace than what a traditional HR role will give you, or what I could see in a traditional HR role. I've now worked with some pretty amazing HR people that show me that change can happen a lot faster.
Yep.
But at that time, I was going, well, I could go either way.
Yep.
But I think technology gives me pace that I quite like.
Yeah, okay. So that's interesting. So I was going to ask you that question, which is which I did see you went to the EGM role, and then you came back to CIA.
Yeah.
EGM of HR. And then you came back to, and I was going to ask you, did that short spell back in HR kind of prove to you that actually transformation and tech is really where you want it to be?
Exactly. Yeah. Because that's where, you can't do transformation without people. So really value that the role that CPO or Chief People Officer contributes to transformation from an org design perspective, etc. So learned that appreciation very much while I was at GWW.
Yep.
But the role that I was performing in my previous role was a traditional HR role that the organisation wanted transformation, but it wasn't quite ready for it yet.
Yep.
Hence why I went, well, actually, it's probably, I can probably move faster in a CIO role.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you found yourself then at City West Water with this kind of vision. So what challenges did that role sort of present you?
A number of challenges in terms of it needed to modernise, hadn't really thought about the toolkitting, had a pretty good strategy, but the strategy was very much around, I'm going to buy this and I'm going to buy this and I'm going to buy this, as opposed to I'm going to deliver this outcome because the business needs to change and be able to be operate more optimally, more efficiently, etc. So having that process re-engineering background means that I'm constantly looking for optimization, and technology should give you optimization. Technology shouldn't be technology for technology's sake.
Yep.
So therefore, it was really taking what was, pretty sound strategy, taking what was a technology program and flipping it into a business program and saying, actually, what business value are we going to start to create? Digital utility makes absolute sense, but we actually have to deliver some business value. We can't just deliver technology because there's a lovely little strategy and roadmap to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as the person, I guess, in that seat as the CIO, how much of that responsibility sat on your shoulders from a business point of view?
It's an interesting question. So, the MD at City West Water, which was David Ryan, really appreciated that technology could be a game changer for the organisation, and he created the role at the executive level to be able to enable that, and I think that gave me permission to be able to work more collaboratively across the organisation to deliver sort of business outcomes.
Yeah, great. So you had that real champion.
Yeah.
And that's interesting as well. So you had total sponsorship from day one and enablement to and a voice as well to express that. You also, in that time, I mean, there's so much kind of going on through City West into Greater Western Water, and you merged with Western Water. And as you were talking earlier about Ansett, I guess what was going through my mind is how much of that experience from that moment of your life kind of came flooding back to you through the merger with Western Water, and maybe the impact you were probably going to have in finding synergies with putting the two teams together.
Probably not so. I understood it from a merger perspective in terms of, because prior to Ansett's collapse, we had merged with Air New Zealand. And so therefore I understood the requirements to merge two organisations together, and therefore setting up new processes and practices and consolidating. So that experience from Ansett absolutely came through, but the loss didn't really feature because it was complete loss at Ansett versus...
It went from existing to not existing.
Yeah, and we didn't have, our policy was to have no employee loss. So that was, that was an underpinning policy, and it was culture-led. So the Louise was amazing, who is the Chief People Officer at GW. It was amazing in ensuring that was always at the front of our mind. So I didn't have to really worry about that because it was the ethos of the merger.
Yeah.
Being very people focused and being, really concerned about the loss of identity of both organisations into the new organisation. So I wasn't concerned about that, but I was very much concerned about how do I bring these two things together in the short time frame that we did have, and what are the processes that needed to happen in order for us to get there. And for example, that I had some knowledge that the merger was going to be announced, so therefore knew that I needed to set up a procurement panel in order to be able to buy services at pace and scale in order to deliver the integration or the merger in the time frame that it needs to be done.
Yeah, got it. That's interesting. So you knew that the speed or the efficiency of the what you had to do post merger was going to maybe take away some of that anxiety for people and enable you to bring things together much quicker and kind of remove any ambiguity or uncertainty for people.
Or just make sure that we delivered the outcome that we said that we would.
And delivered the outcome. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's interesting. I also read on your resume, which I thought, by the way, was one of an awesome highlight for you to put on your resume, was how 3 of your leadership team at Greater Western Water have gone on to become CIOs. And you don't see that very often on someone's resume, by the way. And I looked at that and I thought that probably spoke a lot about you and your nurture and care of people. I was just interested, is it something, how front and center of your mind when you're kind of nurturing your leadership team?
So I think I said before that I've lived a charmed life, and a lot of that life has been because I've had really, really great sponsorship. And I could reel off a laundry list of people that have been so influential, had given me the chance when, given me the chance because they saw something in me, and really pushed me to go, you can do this.
Yeah.
And so at some point when I moved from that manager role to the executive role, I knew that it was time for me to swap my focus and to go, how can I give back and how can I build great people and work with people to help them achieve what they can achieve.
Yeah, fantastic. One of those is Don McGowan. We've got Don up next, actually. He's on the next week's show. You got any advice for me?
Don is fast, dynamic, amazing with people, builds rapport like no other. And so I said, you walk into a room with Don, he may know absolutely nobody. He will walk out with 10 best friends.
Yeah.
And it's that, that's his superpower, and that's what makes him really successful. It's about how to harness, with Don, hopefully he'll be okay with me saying this, it's about how to harness his superpower with all of his expertise into sort of channeled, know what I want, know how to get it type thing.
Yeah, great. Have you got a question I can ask Don?
How do you do it? How do you do it? And can he tell me?
Yeah.
Because I'm still trying to figure out, even though I've worked with him for 5 years, how he does it so well.
Yeah, that's great.
The lovable larrikin.
Yeah, he certainly is. That's right. I was also reflecting on your resume, and I kind of saw this particularly with GW. You've kind of got water, you've got utilities, you've got tech, and I thought, wow, you really are a role model as a female leader, working in what are traditionally very male-dominated sort of worlds. And I also saw through that you established a mentoring program for women at GW. What did that involve?
So there was a number of different ladies, young women, etc. And it was really around going, how can we put this together so that there's strength in numbers and that it's possible to do things. Because I always think that the problem with us, and me in particular, I had the opportunity to realise that I did have quite a significant imposter syndrome. I went out and got a master's degree in technology just so that I could prove that I was technical, but that's because I didn't ever feel adequate enough. And so acknowledging that I had that, potentially had others had that, and go, actually, you're pretty awesome because you do really great stuff. How can we bounce off each other and learn from others to actually grow that person into that next role or that next opportunity, or even not. Yeah. So...
Yeah, that's great. Because I hear, every company we talk to talks about diversity. But what I don't see enough of those kind of what I call advocacy groups, where they're actually focusing on, well, hang on a minute, it's all well and good saying we want to promote more women into technology or bring more women in, but you've got to create the environment to make that work. Otherwise, you're just kind of hitting a KPI and a statistic, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's not meaningful.
That's right.
So it has to be absolutely meaningful, and probably, talk about the people that have become CIOs. Don's one of them, Shuba's the other. And, I think the day that I met Shuba, you could see her work ethic and drive and things like that. But I don't think she could ever see the ambition in herself.
Yeah.
And, she very much led a lot of the integration and the merger, and she emerged her leadership style and her drive and commitment really blossomed, and and now she's CIO. It's wonderful, and I just love watching that.
Was that your role to kind of put a mirror up to show her that?
Well, I think
it was. To help her to see it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's any leader's role, though. That we can't be good at the exec level without awesome people with us, and so therefore our focus and attention is to show people how awesome they are, and harness that talent that they've got to go on and do great things for the organisation, and then potentially great things outside the organisation.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I'm a big believer in hidden potential, and I think often it's hidden from the person themselves.
Yeah.
And it's our job to help to show that.
Yeah.
And create that opportunity as well. I saw towards the end at GW, you moved from CIO to finance, and then back to transformation. I was just sort of interested, how natural was that to you move from tech into finance and kind of around those different functions?
It was absolutely a challenge. I won't lie, because again, I'm not a finance person.
Yeah.
I had, when I was at Parks, I did have accountability for finance, so it wasn't foreign to me. And my MBA had a finance, specialty in it. So numbers weren't a problem for me. It's probably just, again, a bit of an imposter. I'm not an accountant, so I don't understand. But it was, I had great people around me. So the previous CFO was still in the organisation, which I would go, Michael, can you please come and help me? And Marie was awesome in the sense of giving me the opportunity and helping me through it. So it was, sure, let's have a crack.
Did that exposure make you better at what you do today?
Every experience I have makes me better at what I do today, because I learned something that I don't know. In that instance, I learned a lot about audit and risk and strategy in a way that, how do you bring those two together, because it makes a difference.
Yeah.
And so without having spent time doing that role, listening to a board telling you about what their concerns are and their risks are, and then you're going, how can you fix, again, my mind goes, how can I fix that?
Yeah.
I think that absolutely makes me a better person.
Yeah. Because I was wondering if suddenly when you're sitting a different side of the table and you're holding the purse strings, was there any kind of aha moments when you look back and you think about when you were maybe...
understanding the finances of an organisation and how you... the mechanics of it, absolutely. Doing the budgeting process and things like that, it's always an interesting exercise. I think, but more so for me, it was about joining the dots and going, how did they all work together? Because that's sort of what I tend to like to do.
Look, I think it's great. I remember at the time that kind of musical chairs, if everyone kind of rejigging seats, so to speak. And I thought there's not many organisations that are that bold to actually do it. But I'd imagine that you'd be a better unit as an exec team for living each other's. I'm sure you could go to Michael and say, God, now I get some of the crap you were dealing with every day.
Yeah.
And it makes you better as a team, I think.
And it also makes you appreciate the skill set and the experience that a person has,
Yeah.
because at an exec level, that experience that somebody has is actually quite invaluable because they see things faster than you do.
Yeah.
So that there's a reason why people have expertise, and I think it's not just because they're good leaders; they've actually got expertise as well.
Yeah, okay. And so you left GW at the end of last year, and you've joined TAC. What drew you to this role?
The opportunity was presented, and it's Geelong, so I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to go to Geelong every day. But it's a great opportunity to transform an organisation that's ripe for transformation and modernisation, and I thought I could actually do something and make a difference again.
Yeah, great. And you're about 3 months or so kind of into that role. How have you onboarded yourself?
So again, I probably entered into the role with confidence that I knew what I was doing from either a transformation or a tech side. But what I didn't know, and it's a brand new industry for me, so I didn't really understand I don't understand and am learning the insurance industry. And so asking a lot of questions, sitting in actuarial meetings, which where I'm learning all about that, is part of the onboarding experience for me. It's really deep learning, deep listening. How does the business work? Why do we do it? What contributes to what are the levers in the organisation that can be pulled, and then for me to be able to go, I think there's ways we can deliver great value again back to the organisation.
Yeah, okay. So if you were giving advice to someone who was about to start a new role, would it be listen deeply?
Listen deeply.
Yeah.
I am not an expert in insurance, and I never will be an expert in insurance. There are experts in the business, and it's listen because they know, as I said before, because they're experts, they will pick things up faster than I could ever pick up as somebody wanting to change activity. So they're going to tell you whether it's going to work or not.
Yeah, great. There's a couple of other things on your resume that I found interesting. You're probably thinking, what have you looked at? I can see every time I say this, you look panicked.
Exactly.
This is great. I saw a theme of continual learning. So I saw an MBA, I saw director's course for the Australian Institute of Directors, I saw a master's in IT. Like, you never stop. Firstly, is the first thing I thought.
I want to do my CPA now. But, everyone's saying to me, why do you need to do a CPA?
Well, I guess that was my question. Kind of how has this self-development been important to you?
I don't know why it's a process of structured learning, so going and getting a qualification. So the MBA just fell. I was offered honours, started honours, realised that I don't really like research because my attention to detail is not that great. And in research you have to really good attention to detail, or be concerned about the quality of your questions. That when I wrote my first set of questions 10 times, I went, it's not for me, and went into the master's program. So that was just an evolution. AICD was an opportunity that was presented to me at VicPol, and I gladly took up. VicPol also gave me the opportunity to do a course called the Cranlana program, and I can't remember if that's on my resume. And that is all about a 6-day program around morals and ethics and good society. And it was, I would say, from a learning perspective and learning and then changing behaviour, that was probably the most instrumental learning program I've had that has changed the way I think and changed the way I work.
Yeah, well, so what was it called?
Cranlana program.
Cranlana. Yeah, okay.
And it's really around looking at what makes a good society. And as leaders in government, or as leaders in any organisation, I think, because it's not just government employees that attend, what's our obligation to ensure that society and the fabric of society stays true and whole? And so that probably had a really big impact, and which is probably the reason I'm still in a government role all these years later.
Yeah, okay. So this sort of tied back to your motivation or your personal motivators about work and contribution.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay. For someone who's sort of considering balancing work, family, study, all these kind of things, what advice would you give them?
You can have it all.
Yeah.
It just means that you have to balance that, and you have to have really good people around you to support you.
Yeah, okay. Great. Great, that's pretty much your career code. I've got no more questions about your resume. Right, you can relax. But these are my kind of more broad questions, I suppose, that I'm interested in sort of generally from your kind of career and life experience. What are you most proud of in your career?
So if you'd asked me that question 3 years ago, I would have said some of the work I did at VicPol in terms of modernising the organisation and enabling it. Today, my proudest moments are the opportunities that my SLT at GW have had as a consequence of me really wanting to work with them to go on and having faith that they could actually deliver, be a CIO or be a C-suite or a leader in their own right. So that is my, I'll be always proud of the team there.
So do you think that kind of stewardship, as I would call it, is kind of part of one of your core values?
Now, yeah, it wasn't always.
Yeah. It's a time and moment for it, isn't it? Yeah. It's very hard early in your career to be thinking about the next generation.
Because I want to be stewarded. Yeah, that point,
that's right. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Have you got any career regrets?
Yeah. So one of the roles that I did, I knew very quickly that role wasn't for me. Again, probably because of the person that I had become heading into that role, and I think I went to that role because I feared to be typecast into a particular type of, this is who you are now, and this is so therefore you can't do any other role. When that wasn't actually quite true, I let my fear take me down a particular path, and that would be one of my biggest regrets, rather than letting opportunity continue to direct my pathway.
Yeah, okay, interesting. You just kind of admit that you don't like attention to detail, but I was going to ask you, if you're considering a new role or new company, how do you do due diligence? How do you kind of decide if it's the right fit for you?
So lean in, learn, and if I think about my role from GW to TAC was very quick. Like the process to go from point A to point B was weeks.
Yeah,
that quick, and all of a sudden, I have to know how I can contribute and how I can add value. Yeah. And so all of a sudden I go, well, how am I going to contribute and add value, and why do I want to do this? I need to actually understand the organisation. So I literally would spend 2 days, because it's such a short period of time, reading every single document, reading the strategy, reading the annual report, doing the Google search, trying to get Google searching the people in the organisation, although Tracy was familiar to me, but as much as I possibly
deeply immerse yourself.
Deeply immerse myself. What is it? Like, I couldn't be an insurance person, so I knew that, but just really understanding, what does the numbers say in the annual report? Are they, is it a time bomb that I'm walking into? All of those sorts of things.
Yeah, great. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. We're often shaped, or we are shaped by the feedback that we receive. So I'm interested, what's been the most significant feedback you've received in your career?
It's an interesting question. Lots. I've had lots of feedback. I think an interesting piece of feedback that probably has stuck with me is not through a normal channel. So it's through a a person that I worked with when I was at VicPol, and then I worked with them again at Parks, and they said to me years, when I was in City West GW, they said, "Oh, it's amazing to see how you've changed," and so therefore, the fact that you've been able to recognise that you were a bull in a china shop, and you've really softened, and now are much more open to people moving at different paces, whereas before it's like, got to get done now, got to get done quick,
So what do you think caused you to soften?
So what caused me to soften? So firstly, probably some good leadership programs that I went on, understanding the influence that you have and the shadow you cast. Being really conscious of now having a role where I have other people's livelihoods that I'm responsible for, so I just can't, drive forward and do it in a bullish way, because people hear and interpret differently. At GW, I had the great opportunity to really invest in my leadership style, and the person I walked into at GW and the person I've walked out is a very different person because of that, and how investing in the way I engage with people, understanding what motivates me, understanding how you can create value collectively, etc. That's made a difference.
Yeah, great. Last question.
Wow.
What singular piece of sage advice would you give to the next generation?
I have 2 teenage children, and so my sage advice today would be, you're not an expert until you learn, so go and learn first.
Yeah.
For those wanting to have, for those who don't think that they can be who they want to be, I'd say the only person stopping you from being that is you. So if you want to be something, it just requires effort, hard work, and focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Great. I did have another question, but I'm not going to ask you that because I think I've given you enough of a grilling. So, you told me earlier you don't really listen to podcasts. I was a little bit offended. But what books do you read?
So I read a little bit of everything. So I quite like crime. So that's my escapism, and I will read a book and I will forget it immediately. Yeah. So those sorts of things, I will read it and I go, oh yeah, that was entertaining, and we'll completely forget about it. I do like to sort of read McKinsey type, articles, and understand, what's happening in the world and where things are evolving, and get a lot of my ideas from that, obviously. And then the leadership books, and I find it's really interesting. I find leadership books challenging to read. Yeah. Even if they're simple, I just find them challenging to read.
In what way?
In the context of trying to apply that to your lived experience, and then how you would potentially change your behaviours. And sometimes it just rubs. Or you look at it and go, I was going to say something, but I probably won't swear. Yeah. But Blind Freddy could see that. So I read a book about a naval captain having to turn the ship. It's called Turn the Ship Around, I think is the name of the book. And I just went, oh yeah, he wasn't an expert, so he came and asked the experts.
No shit,
Sherlock. That's why I struggle with a leadership book, and I'm going, where are you going, and what am I taking from this that will actually help me? And I find articles better than leadership books, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Look, I think we all find our inspiration from different places, and it's some of it's bite-sized and some of it's more in-depth and different things. And I think just immersing ourselves around all those things, you kind of accrue ideas or inspiration, or sometimes those books just remind you of the basics.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do need that reminder because you've forgotten it and you're looking for a complex solution to a problem, but actually it is just finding the right person for the job.
And it's really interesting. I have, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People on my shelf, and I walk past it the last couple of days going, maybe it's time to refresh on that. So I think you're right, 100%.
Yeah, sometimes it's, like I say, it's not always rocket science, but it's reframing. Okay. Look, great. Thank you so much. It's been just amazing to hear your story.
Thanks.
And I think you're a very humble person and you've achieved so much. And I think you're going to keep achieving tons as well from here as well. But so thank you. Thank you for being generous with your time and your experiences.
Thank you. Thanks.
Cheers.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
Tested me the year. I was like really going back on my career. Yeah.
That's right. That's the fun bit.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Emmbr, that's EMMBR LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.